Roccia is coming back in the first half of the version 2.5 updates, and since her last banner, there have been a couple of things that changed about the character. So now you're probably wondering if Roccia is actually worth pulling now. That's what I'm going to be discussing in today's video, by discussing Roccia's biggest pros and cons. The first thing that comes to mind when talking about Roccia is that now with the introduction of Frilova, she is going to have two teams where she is the best in slot option, being with the Frilova and Cantarella team, as well as the Camellia and Shorekeeper team. Roccia has quite some utility that she brings to the table. Her 200 attack buff from her Resonance Liberation is of course very good with any attack scaling DPS, which would be most of the cast. But now what makes her especially good within the Frilova and the Camellia teams would be her Ultra skill, and in the case of Frilova, it is a unique utility that she has access to. Roccia's Ultra skill is capable of buffing both Havoc as well as basic attack damage, which is obviously what almost all of Camellia's damage is going to be counting as, making her the obvious best in slot option when playing Camellia. Roccia will also be capable of buffing the damage of Cantarella, because Cantarella is in the same boat as Camellia thanks to being a Havoc character who deals primarily basic attack damage. So that means Roccia is very good for both Cantarella as well as Camellia. And considering the fact that Cantarella is a very good character to use with Frilova, that means Roccia automatically becomes a good slot within the Frilova team. But she also has additional utility for within the Frilova team, because thanks to Roccia's second inherent skill, her utility becomes an Echo skill, which means that Frilova should be able to get an extra enhanced Hecate attack. Frilova's Hecate's attacks are enhanced whenever teammates use an Echo skill, and because Roccia gives you access to one extra Echo skill compared to any other teammate, that would give her some pretty good synergy with Frilova. Another thing that is very positive for Roccia is the fact that she has access to one of the best grouping abilities in the game. Or rather, should I say, access to two grouping abilities. The thing that makes groupers like Yang Yang and Jianshin not really that powerful is because the grouping doesn't really last a long enough time, as well as the range often being lacking. But Roccia does not face either of these issues. The grouping on Roccia's skill is actually quite powerful. It's definitely able to group every single enemy within Tower of Adversity and Whimpering Wastes, assuming they do not split up too much, which is a pretty good ability considering the fact that Tower has been focusing more on adding strong elites rather than making the bosses a bit more of a wall. And then within Whimpering Wastes, I doubt I really have to tell you why grouping is good. Whimpering Wastes is an AoE game mode, so the ability to group enemies is pretty handy when we're talking about characters that have less range. By grouping them up, you're able to hit more of them with lower range abilities, which can be very handy for some characters. So when it comes to the strength of her grouping, Roccia is a very good addition to the cast. We have gotten new groupers since her release, with the biggest one being Lupa, but Lupa is only able to group once, whereas Roccia's grouping has a longer duration than hers, because not only does Roccia have a pretty long-lasting skill which is able to group throughout the entire animation, she also changes your utility, and turns it into a Gathering Tornado, which will be able to group enemies even after Roccia has swapped out. So unlike Yang Yang or Jianshin or even Lupa, Roccia's grouping will last for an extended period rather than just a couple of seconds, meaning that her grouping ability is the best in the entire game. If I had to give another positive to Roccia, it would have to be the fact that she is an alternative to the omnipresent Sanhua. Sanhua has gotten quite a reputation throughout the game's lifespan, and even with that reputation, some people still don't seem to value this character enough. If you do not have the limited 5-star teammates, well guess what? You're almost always going to be using Sanhua as your next best option. This means that on some accounts, your Sanhua is going to be extremely busy, which, you know, not exactly very nice. But Roccia, because she's capable of also buffing basic attacks, much like Sanhua, can be a pretty okay replacement for her. Obviously, she's not going to be the same as Sanhua in every team. She's most likely going to be worse in the majority of them. But if the DPS in question does primarily basic attack damage, Roccia will serve as a pretty okay replacement compared to Sanhua. Sanhua will be better, but, well, it's Sanhua. What are we expecting here? Now it's time to get into the less good parts of Roccia. The first thing that comes to mind to me is the fact that Roccia is really replaceable. And when I mean really replaceable, oh, I mean really replaceable. I don't think I can stress enough just how easy it is to get by when you do not have a Roccia on your account. Roccia is obviously, like I said, best in slot in 2 teams, something that most sub-DPS characters cannot say. But unlike those other sub-DPS characters, Roccia is so easy to get rid of it's not even funny, starting with her original team being Camellia. Camellia, well, I kinda made an entire segment about it just now, huh? Sanhua is insanely broken. And guess what? Camellia seems to have almost perfect synergy with Sanhua. Roccia's innate attack buff from her liberation gets cancelled out by the fact that Sanhua has access to her S6, which will actually outscale the Roccia attack buff. Obviously, Roccia's outro skill is slightly better than that of Sanhua, and Roccia also does more damage than Sanhua. But Sanhua's rotation is so laughably short that it's basically impossible to justify pulling for Roccia purely because of a Camellia team. Even when we look at the fact that Roccia has access to grouping, while this can be convenient, Camellia is already an insane DPS for AoE scenarios, which means that the grouping that Roccia provides, honestly, it feels really unneeded. We're talking about Camellia here. She's one of the best AoE DPSs in the entire game, and you really think that she needs grouping? I sure don't. And don't even get me started on the Frolova team. Sure, Roccia is capable of buffing Cantarella. However, Cantarella's personal damage is not exactly the brightest bulb. And while Roccia does give you access to an extra Echo Cast, it's just one. Like, you're not getting an insane amount of extra enhanced attacks from Hecate here. It's just one more. So is it really worth running Roccia when you could just be running Shorekeeper instead to buff your Frolova harder? Well, technically it is worth it because Roccia is a better teammate. But what I'm trying to say here is that the difference between using Roccia and using Shorekeeper within a Frolova team is going to be small enough to a point where pulling for Roccia should only be done by someone who is truly dedicated to the Havoc characters. Then for the next point, which is that Roccia is an investment. If you're getting the Roccia, you kinda need to get her signature weapon. Okay, don't get me twisted here. I'm not saying that Roccia doesn't function without her signature weapon, or that it's some kind of massive damage loss, but this is kind of an extension of the previous point. Roccia is so easy to replace within your teams that if you don't have her signature weapon, she kind of just will be replaced. Within the context of a Camellia team, a Roccia with Abyss Surges is going to just be worse than Sanhua on Emerald of Genesis, because we're putting more stake on Roccia's damage output, and thus you kinda need to get her signature weapon to make sure it's up to par. If you don't get Roccia's signature weapon, it's just kind of unfortunate. So while I can't really say this is like a separate con, even though I did write it as one, it's more so just an extension of the fact that she is so easy to replace. Ultimately, while Roccia doesn't have many cons, the cons she does have make her a really hard investment to justify. You should only really get her if your intent is to get the best possible teams for your Frolova and your Camellia. If you have no other reason to want a Roccia, you honestly just shouldn't be pulling for her, but that's just my opinion. Let me know what you think of her down in the comments below, and while you're down there, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions, be sure to ask them in my Discord server. I'm pretty active in there, so there's a pretty good chance I'll respond. If you just want to see more of me, be sure to check out my second channel, which is also linked in the description. I primarily upload Punishing Grey Raven, but I kinda just make videos on whatever I feel like. But that'll be all from me. Peace.